Okay, we're on. So good evening, everyone. I hope you saw the source sheets. I wanted to look at the issue of Birchas Kohanim, a very interesting topic. I'm in fact going to speak about it also in my YouTube clip for my drasha this week, but hopefully in this year we'll be able to go a little deeper into it. Birchas Kohanim is an important mitzvah. The Kohanim used to duchen at the time of the Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash, and also, as we know, there's a shiur, an obligation on Kohanim to duchen in Tefillah, to duchen in davening, and the relationship between Tefillah and Birchas Kohanim, duchening, is an interesting one. But it would appear that Tefillah is a trigger for an obligation to duchen, to do Birchat Kohanim min ha-Torah. So there's an obligation, a deraisa obligation on a kohen to duchen as is appropriate during tefillah. It's an interesting thing because there is a machlokas, an argument, whether davening, the obligation to daven, is itself min ha-Torah, deraisa, or only drabanan. In other words, it may be that our obligation to daven, a regular fixed tefillah, is only rabbinic. Nonetheless, when we daven, there is an obligation to say Birchas Kohanim, duchening min ha-Torah. So duchening is a pasuk in this week's Zedra, close to Varuches B'nai Yisrael, Amar Lahem. So there's a chiyuv, an obligation on the Kohanim, close to Varuchu. This is how you should give the bracha. It's an obligation on the Kohanim to give the bracha whenever there is the appropriate trigger for so doing. And what's the trigger for so doing? That is the avodah in the Beis HaMikdash, or tefillah even in shul. And as we know, even us non-Kohanim have adopted this text of the bracha for the bracha that we give our children, for the parents' blessing that we give the children. Many have the minhag to do so on Friday nights, or perhaps only on Erev Yom Kippur, as it may be. Now, we're going to look in a few moments at the text, the nusach of this beautiful bracha, which is from the Torah. But first, just the general introduction, the concept of a bracha. I've spoken about it actually in this forum before. Normally, we'll see in a few moments, in Birchas Kohanim, the bracha is certainly ascribed to Hashem. But we also make brachas where we give a bracha to Hashem. Baruch atah Hashem. Blessed are you, O Hashem. And this is an interesting idea, what it means to give a bracha to Hashem. Hashem is, the concept of a bracha normally is fulfillment of some sort of need or some sort of lack. The etymology of the word bracha is perhaps linked to the word brecha, which is a pool. In biblical Hebrew, in the Hebrew of Tanakh, it refers particularly to the pool, which is the overflow pool of a spring. You can still see to this day springs Mayonot in Eretz Yisrael, and around the spring people dig a pool, and the Mayon, the fountain, the spring overflows into the pool. So brecha is a pool, an overflowingness. So a bracha is there should be an overflowingness of shefa, of divine gifts. Now, giving a bracha to Hashem is an interesting idea. Hashem has everything. He's kol yachol, he's all powerful. He has everything he could possibly need. He's omniscient, omnipotent, infinite in his being. So what does it mean to say that we give Hashem a bracha, a blessing? It's a little bit of a difficulty. It's something that's discussed by the Rishonim and the Achronim already. What we mean by that. One possible meaning of the word bracha is not this overflow pool that we already said. It may come from the word berach. We say in Aleinu. It may come from the word berach. Berach is the knee, so it's the idea of kneeling or bowing down and acknowledging that which we received from Hashem. So Baruch Atah Hashem means we bow to you, we submit to you, Hashem. But that's not the normal meaning of how we translate it as a bracha, a blessing. So what does it mean that we bless Hashem? It may be a recognition that Hashem has granted us the gift of life and the gift of free choice, our creativity, that we're not static, we're genuinely new, we're not programmed, and therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to us, I have the whole world, this is true, but I've granted you one small place where you can choose whether to let me in or not. And through you recognizing me, through you acknowledging me, berach, bowing to me, through you taking this food, this cup of water that you hold in your hand, and recognizing that this comes from Hashem, you are allowing Hashem into our space. We can empty our space of God. We can fill it with our own ego, with our own selfishness, with our own arrogance, with our own hubris and sense of self-importance and power. But that's not what we do. Instead, we allow Hashem in, and therefore we are indeed giving a bracha to Hashem. We're recognizing that Hashem is even here, even in ourselves, even in our own space, and that's the concept of a bracha, is an overflowing. What blessing can we give Hashem? What is he lacking, as it were? Since he has chosen to give us ownership of our own experience, of our own lives, we face the choice. We have in our power whether to let him into that or not. So we make brachas on food. We could use the food for our own selfish pleasure. Instead, we use it in recognition of Hashem. We acknowledge it comes from God, and therefore that's a bracha on food. We also make brachas on mitzvahs. That makes sense again. When we choose to do a mitzvah, we're acknowledging Hashem in so doing. Here in Birchas Kohanim, it's a little different. It's a simpler idea. It's Hashem granting us a bracha using the medium or the channel of the Kohanim. And we'll soon see that it's very clear from the Psukim that this isn't really the Kohen giving us the bracha. It's the Kohen delivering to us, transporting to us, acting as a channel for the bracha of Hashem. Why do we say brachas when we speak to Hashem? Indeed, why do the Kohanim need to say to us? We'll look at that in more detail later, but probably the general idea that by concretizing something, we make it more real and more impactful on us. In general, in Yiddishkeit, in Judaism, in Halacha, we don't leave thoughts or emotions abstract. We immediately want to channel them and concretize them. And therefore, this is probably the idea of the Kohen saying the bracha. What's the idea of needing a blessing at all? Surely if Hashem wants to give it to us, he wants to give it to us. And if he doesn't want to give it to us, he doesn't want to give it to us. So again, this gets us onto the broader issue of tefillah, of prayer, and why we should ever need to daven, which is a very important topic and one that needs really addressing in its own right. But basically speaking, the world is the spiritual world, the physical world is overflowing with an enormous outpouring of energy. Even in a physical sense, the sun is constantly pouring out far more energy than all of humankind could ever use in its whole existence. And the earth only receives a tiny fraction, a percent of this vast outflow of energy. How much of it do we receive? Very, very little. We aren't a fitting kli kibble. We aren't enough of a receptacle, a utensil to receive that bracha. And the concept of receiving bracha or davening is to make ourselves better kli kibble, better receptacles, better utensils to receive the bracha. The bracha is there, the blessing is there, there's enough from Hashem. We need to choose whether we accept it or not. How can we not accept it? By not recognizing it comes from Hashem, by blinding ourselves to the source of bracha. Hashem is the makor ha-bracha, he's the source of bracha. By filling ourselves with so much arrogance or hubris or ego or selfishness that we can't receive anything. But if we choose to receive, then the bracha can be there for us for the taking. And therefore, a bracha, the concept of tefillah, is sort of predicated on the idea that we have the resource within ourselves enough to receive that which we that which there's plenty out there. We simply need to make sure that we're fitting to receive, and through saying a bracha, through davening, we acknowledge and recognize Hashem, and therefore we are a fitting receptacle to receive the bracha. So this is the concept of a blessing, a bracha. Very powerful, the idea of a bracha. Now, this particular blessing, as I say, is not us blessing Hashem. So let's move this a little bit. It's not us blessing Hashem, but it's Hashem blessing us. And we refer to this bracha as bracha hamashaleshes. Where do we refer to it as bracha hamashaleshes? The triple bracha, the tripartite bracha. The bracha made up of 3 parts. This is in source 2, I think, which I put on the handouts. We say this in davening as an introduction to, actually not as an introduction, as when in tefillah, when we introduce the kohanim, if there are no kohanim present, if there's no birchas kohanim, then we say, you should bless us, but bracha hamashaleshes, with the triple bracha of birchas kohanim. So the text of birchas kohanim, which I put in source 1, is divided into 3 blessings. The truth is, when we probe a little deeper, we see there are in fact 6 blessings, but it's evident from the language of Chazal that they broke up these 6 blessings into 3 brachas of 2 parts each. In fact, in line with the Psukim in the Torah. So if we read the Psukim as they are, we might think these are 6 blessings. Yovarecha Hashem, Hashem should bless you. V'yishmerech, on guard you, number 2. Yashem panav elecha, number 3. V'yichanek, number 4. And Yis Hashem panav elecha, v'yasenu chashonim, numbers 5 and 6. So again, if we look in the translation, there's 6 separate features blessed. Nonetheless, Chazal divided them into 3 blessings, each one consisting of 2 parts. And therefore, this is known as the bracha mashaleshes, the triple part bracha. Now, really, therefore, what I wanted to spend a significant part of our time on doing is simply understand what the brachas are about. They're not so easy to translate. Again, I will give a slightly different pshat in my drasha, which I prepare, will release via YouTube before Shabbos. However, for the sheer purposes, I wanted to look at one possible reading of these brachas, because they're a little hard to understand. Hashem should bless you, he should light his face up towards us. What exactly does it mean that Hashem lights his face up? Lights his face, illuminates his face upon us. He lifts up his countenance. These are all words that the English translation doesn't add that much to the Hebrew. You know, there are many Hebrew words and phrases that we use that the English translation, they're only ever used in the context of, the English words are only ever used in the context of the Hebrew translation, don't really add that much. So someone says to you, what's a mishkan? So you say, it's a tabernacle. Thank you very much. What's a tabernacle? I've got no idea. Or a tefillin or phylacteries, or a mikveh is a ritualarium. So Hashem illuminating his face and lighting up his face, lifting up his countenance. What's exactly do any of these terms mean? What's exactly the answer to the meaning? So what I wanted to do was look at, in source 3, I've printed Rashi's pshat in the pasuk and also Chazal's comment. So basically, I just assembled an assembly of various comments of Chazal, brought in Rashi and brought in Chazal, and I was helped in this task of collecting Chazal by the work of the Torah Tumima, who of course on each pasuk selected and collected all the relevant sources from the Gemara and the halachic midrashim on these pasukim. So I simply cut and paste those into the source sheet. So looking at pasuk 23, which actually is the introduction to the bracha, so we perhaps should have looked at this inside. So source 1, pasuk 22 and 23. Vaydaber Shem al Moshe lemar, Dabel Aaron ve'elbanav lemar. Speak to Aaron and his sons, saying. So this is speaking to Aaron and his sons, in other words, all kohanim. Kosavarches b'nei Yisrael, Omar lahem. So you should bless the children of Israel. Say unto them. Now on this Chazal comment, Es b'nei Yisrael, mikan she'ein nasiot kapayim b'pachos me asara. From here we learn that there is no duchening less than with a minion of 10. This is actually from the Ran, one of the Rishonim, Rabbeinu Nissim, commenting on the commenting on the Gemara in Megillah. From this we learn that you need a minion. So unfortunately, those of us who have not been able to daven with a minion haven't had duchening over this time, even on Shavuos, on Pesach, because we didn't have a minion. So I see Viv here. One of your neighbors, Viv, told me how beautiful your davening is on Shabbos and Yom Tov and what a difference it made to them. So shkoyach for that. People really appreciated being able to hear your tefillah from their gardens. But if you didn't have a minion, I understand they didn't hear duchening from you. They weren't able to hear duchening. So that part of davening, unfortunately, they could get an incredible chizuk from hearing the tefillah. But duchening is only b'nei Yisrael, when it's a communal thing, when Klal Yisrael are together, not when sadly we're broken up into pieces. So that's the first comment of the poskim on this pasuk. The second comment is actually a very, very important one, an interesting one. Omar Lahem, you should say to them. Now, Omar Lahem is an interesting language, interesting use of language. We don't normally think of duchening as saying something to someone else, engaging in conversation with someone else. There are many ways in Hebrew to say a recital. It could have just said Kos Varches b'nei Yisrael, so you should bless them. How should you bless them? Yivarechu Hashem v'yishmerecha. It could have said Daber Lohem, speak to them. It could have said Tagid Lohem, tell them. Tikra Lohem, read to them. Generally, the Hebrew word used for recital of a pre-established text is Kriya. For example, Kriyat Torah, Kriyat Shema. We read something that's already previously said. Even if you say Shema off by heart, it's still Kriyat Shema, because you're reciting a set text that's not written on a piece of paper, you're saying off by heart, but written in your mind. So the use of Omar Lohem is something that Chazal picked up on. And they say a fascinating idea that the way Kohanim are meant to give the bracha is meant to be conversation style. It's conversing. Omar Lohem, Tana Rabbanon, this is a Gemara in Sota, Kosavarchu Ponim Keneged Ponim, face to face, from which we learn the halachas that the Kohanim swivel around and face the congregation. Or perhaps they should say it face to neck. How do we know how to do it? Tamad Loma Omar Lohem, converse with them. Like someone who is conversing, speaking to their friend. In Lashon HaKodesh, Daber is a less human-centric form of communication. You know, when you're teaching, there are two ways of teaching. You can be focused on the idea, on the content, in which case it will be called Daber, where the root of Daber is Dover, or the object, the matter. Or you can be focused on the human being, in which case it will be Omer, it will be speaking, conversational. And Chazal is saying over here that the pasuk means that the Birchas Kohanim should be said in a conversational manner. The next Chazal says the same idea. Omer Lahem, a different element of speaking. Should it be said loudly or quietly? Maybe Kohanim should whisper Birchas Kohanim. Talmud Loma Omer Lahem ka'adam she'omer lachaveru. You should make sure that the audience can hear it. From which we learn that the Kohanim have to project their voice a little, so that we, standing in the congregation, can hear it. So there's a relationship going on between the Kohanim and the participants. By the way, we learn practical halachas from that. First of all, we learn the nusach ha-tfilah, the nusach ha-bracha. There's a very interesting element of the nusach ha-bracha. I printed this at the end of source 2. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech ha'olam, asher g'neshanim b'kedushaso shel Aaron. Fine, v'tzivonu. What's the mitzvah? Levorich es Am Yisrael, to bless his people. So the Kohanim say we have a bracha to bless the people, but then they carry on ba'ahava, with love. Where do we get from this idea that Birchas Kohanim has anything to do with love? I mean, the Kohen stands up and he does his job. Whether he loves his audience or doesn't love his audience is a separate matter. What's it got to do with love? And we see from the Nusach HaBracha, and in a moment we'll see that this is reflected in Halacha also, that no, Birchas Kohanim has to be said with love. And the source of this idea is Amar Lahem. It has to be conversational, face to face. There's a relationship going on in Birchas Kohanim between the Kohen and the audience. And certainly standing from the audience side, I don't know whether the Kohanim will confirm this from their side. One does feel a very personal sense of connection to those who are, for us listening. We feel the Kohanim are speaking to us and they're directing the bracha to us. I think it's a very interesting thing that we all say shkoyach to the Kohanim afterwards. Now, why are we saying shkoyach to them? It's not the most, forgive me for saying this, it's not the most taxing task in the world, surely saying the Psukim V'recha. I mean, I say this bracha every week to my children, and it's not that difficult to say. It's a sequence of 3 fairly short psukim. And the shkoyach is a recognition that the Kohanim have been not just a vehicle, an empty vehicle for the delivery of the bracha to Hashem, where they're just a pipeline with none of themselves in it, but they're putting their heart into it. It's ba'ava, it's said with their care and with their love, because Amar Lahem, it's meant to be said ponim el ponim, face to face, conversationally. So this is one halacha that we learn from these psukim, the nusach ha-bracha, ba'ahava. The bracha tells us the mitzvah has to be done with love. Point number 1. Point number 2, if a Kohen doesn't love his audience, if a Kohen is broigus with the audience, with the congregation, with the participants, or the other way around, if one of the participants are broigus with the Kohen, then it's not so simple for the Kohen to give the bracha. There's a halacha that if there's someone there who has a hakbada, if the Kohen has a hakbada, and in their mind say, I'm willing to give the bracha to everyone here, bar one, they're not allowed to duchen. Now, why not? There's 500 people in the shul, talking about the shul packed on the Rosh Hashanah, Kippur, 400, 500 people there, and there's one person the Kohen doesn't like. Let them give the bracha to the remaining 499. Why should they be deprived of the Birchas Kohanim? Maybe there's only one Kohen in shul, and he doesn't like one person, he doesn't want to give a bracha to them. Nonetheless, he can't give the bracha to anyone, because it has to be ba'ava, it has to be a two-way connection, a conversation, upon him. There's another halacha, by the way, that we learn from this, which is a subject of much debate amongst the poskim, which is the issue of Shomea Ka'oneh with Birchas Kohanim. Now, the concept of Shomea Ka'oneh is whenever there are mitzvahs which have to be said or recited, I can fulfill the mitzvah not just by saying it, but also by listening to it. Listening is another form of connecting to the word. So I have to listen to the Megillah, I can hear someone reading it, and I listen to the Megillah, and through that I also connect to the content. Kiddush, right? One person says Kiddush, and I listen, and I say, I listen quietly, and through that I've connected to the content of Kiddush, and that's sufficient laning, Kriyas HaTorah, we already mentioned, and so on and so forth. Now, what happens when it comes to Birchas Kohanim? What happens if you have a Kohen who, for some reason or other, is unable to say the brachas themselves medically, or they just don't know the Hebrew, they're not educated? Can they fulfill the mitzvah through Shomea Ka'oneh? And the answer is, according to many poskim, not. And the reason is because there's a logic here that we have to think through. There's a rationale. If the mitzvah is merely connecting to the content of the words, then the halachic principle of Shomea Ka'oneh, listening, is like responding, is enough. I'm connecting to the words by listening. I'm also connecting to the concepts. So the Torah says, Zochres Yom HaShabbos, I have to mention the sanctity of Shabbos on Shabbos. If I can't mention it myself, I didn't say it, I can listen and through that fulfill my obligation of Kiddush. But over here, the whole point is, Omer Elohim, I have to communicate to the audience. Shomea Ka'oneh doesn't make communication. I'm sitting there listening to someone, they're communicating to the audience, I'm just sitting there listening. I may be communicating to myself, I'm receiving words, but I'm not communicating to anyone external to myself by listening. And therefore, according to many poskim, this is the svara of the Beis Halevi, the famous Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, the founder of the Brisker dynasty. His argument is that since Birchas Kohanim has to be done b'kol rom, through me projecting myself. I have to say it, Omar Elohim, I have to say it to the audience, to the recipients. Therefore, the concept of Shomea Ka'ona, of listening, doesn't make sense. So we learn a number of important halachas from this idea of Bechas Kohanim, Omar Elohim, that has to be said conversationally. Someone here posted in the chat, why do we say ornate melodies when it's meant to be an informal conversation? The answer is, I didn't say it's an informal conversation, it's a very formal conversation, because it's a pre-described text of what's meant to be said. But the point is that when the Kohen says it, he's meant to be saying it and addressing it to the audience and forming that connection. The main reason for the melodies, if we have time, we'll see a source about this later, is actually to allow kavanah, so that we can focus our minds on receiving the bracha and thinking about the meaning and content of the bracha, which is why it's not a hefsek, it's not an interruption. Generally speaking, when we say a bracha on a mitzvah, we immediately have to perform the mitzvah. Now the Kohanim say the bracha on Bechas Kohanim, and then they interrupt before they even say the very first words. They begin singing, and certainly before they finish the mitzvah, which is only concluded with the final shalom at the end of the bracha, they interrupt by singing. Nonetheless, this is done in order to facilitate kavanah, and therefore this is enough to fulfill the mitzvah. It's not a hefsek in the mitzvah, and that's why it's allowed. So it is a conversation, but not an informal conversation, in answer to the question that was posted on the chat group. I would say, by the way, if anyone wants to ask anything, please use the chat facility or just unmute yourself and ask. Okay, so that's the comments of Chazal on the first pasuk of these Bechas Kohanim, as I said, with important halachic ramification, Omar ba'ahava. Yeah, someone posted over here in Israel where they duchen often, there are no tunes. That is correct. That's largely because of because it's done during the weekday. Therefore, people are under more time pressure and they don't do so. Even in Israel, very often when they duchen on Yom Tov, where people are under less pressure, they do duchen with a tune. Okay, I'm a little short of time, so I'm just trying to think what I'll focus on. I did actually want to get onto the subject of duchening in Israel, which is a very fascinating one, but maybe we'll do that for another year. Why is it that in Chutz La'aretz we only duchen on Yom Tov, and according to some minhagim on Shabbos, according to other customs not on a Shabbos that falls on Yom Tov, but we only duchen Yom Tov, not on weekday and not on a regular Shabbos. Whereas in Israel they duchen the whole time. And why didn't they duchen in all of Israel? For those of you who have been to Tzfat and other such places, you will know that they don't duchen on the weekday on Tzfat. How did this develop is a fascinating subject, but I don't think we'll have time for that today. So let's try and look at the contents of Yivarechecha. Very briefly, we'll look at Rashi in, again, continuation of source 3. Yivarechecha, Rashi says, Yisparchu nechasecha. Yivarecha refers to a physical blessing. If we look down in the Chazal, the sources which are printed below that, Yivarecha he brings from a Sifri, which is a Midrashic halacha, that in general it's an interesting thing. When we find the Torah using the word bracha, it refers to physical blessings. The most classic bracha that we know of is, of course, the first bracha that Hashem gave Adam, Puru, having a family. Then there's the bracha that Avraham, gave, that Yitzchak, gave, intended for Esau and ended up for Yaakov. The blessings in the Torah are generally physical. Why that is so, again, is a subject for another shiur. Maybe we'll talk about it when we learn one of the sedras of bracha and klala, but be that as it may, that's a fact. And therefore Rashi says, Yivarecha here refers to physical blessing. And this is now the beginning of the answer as to why we view this as 3 blessings rather than 6. Because each second half of the couplet is qualifying or strengthening or protecting the first half of the couplet. And therefore the pairing goes as follows. Yivarecha, may Hashem bless you physically. But, says Rashi, v'yishmerecha. Now, therefore, that we have physical possessions, we need to be guarded. Says Rashi, that thieves, violent people won't come and loot one's property, etc., etc. So, therefore, one needs shmira. Someone who has an increase of physical possessions needs the second half of the blessing, which is that we should be guarded physically. The Chazal in the source that I brought below Rashi on the word v'yishmerecha say a slightly different take on it. Yishmerecha, yitzinecha bris avisecha. We should get bris of us, the covenant of our ancestors, which possibly means that here the concern in this reading is not that we need protection physically for our wealth, but that we need spiritual protection for our wealth. Money can be a blessing, but just as easily it can be a curse. We witness people who are damaged by and ruined by the trappings of wealth, sometimes even more so than by the trials and tribulations of poverty. And therefore, Yivarech Hashem, but now that we have a shefa of bracha, we have a wealth and an overflowing of blessing, V'yishmerech Hashem to guard us from our own success. So these are two readings in the Psukim, either physical blessing with the guarding that our physical blessing shouldn't be taken, we shouldn't lose our wealth, physically they shouldn't be taken away from us, or that we should have spiritual blessings that guard us likewise. Second bracha, Yo'ar Hashem panav elecha, Rashi says, Yo'ar ze ma'or haTorah, this is the light of the Torah. Now, again, I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, but light in general is the metaphor for spiritual qualities in the Torah. And the reason for this is on many levels. Light is certainly the most spiritual of all the physical forces in the world. Light ultimately is physical. I mean, the laws of science and physics apply to light. It's not spiritual. Light is not spiritual. But light is a metaphor for spirituality because it's the most intangible and non-substantial and non-physical of everything that exists in the world. And perhaps it's only really in the last century with insights of Einstein that we've realized to what degree that is the case. But certainly light is an image, as the closest metaphor we can get to that which is immaterial, that which isn't earthy and physical and material. Number one. Number two, light means clarity. When we can see, we have a vision of where we're going. In darkness, we're confused and everything is blurred and unclear. And therefore, again, light is a good mashal, a good parable, a good allegory for spirituality, which hopefully brings with it a clarity of purpose and mission, as opposed to being befuddled in the dark. Okay, so that's the bracha of Yo'eh, that Hashem should give us spiritual clarity. V'chuneka. We now say the second half of the blessing. V'chuneka, Hashem should grant us favor. So why do we need a granting of favor when we get spiritual qualities? So there's three ways really to understand this. Rashi says it refers to favor in the eyes of our fellow creatures, and perhaps alluding to the idea that when someone acquires spiritual qualities, it's easy for people to sneer at that and for them to cease to find favor in the eyes of other people. We therefore ask that we should find favor, that Frummi, everything he does and all his crazy chumras and stringencies, and he thinks he's better than the rest of us. So spiritual achievements can bring with it a loss of favor in other people's eyes, and therefore this is the bracha that's been given. Or the flip side, maybe it's warning us that when we acquire greater spiritual qualities, we need to ensure that we find favor in other people's eyes. People watch us and they look at us and they see us as a role model, and it's far easier for us to, God forbid, create a chil Hashem, to create a desecration of the name of Hashem, because people look at us and they say this is someone who thinks of themselves, holds themselves genuinely as a religious person, a person who lives with the Hashem, the light of God in his life, with the light of Torah. Are they really acting? Are they really behaving in a way that deserves favor? And therefore, there's the need for this additional bracha of Yichuneka, that we should find favors. This is a second reason, a reading in the pasuk. A third reading in the pasuk is Yichuneka. We should find favor in the sense of we should have the ability to see favorably others. Because again, with the gift of enhanced spirituality, can chas v'shalom come a judgmentalism, a fundamentalism, that we become so confident in our own spirituality and in our own knowledge of that which is right and wrong. We have the Hashem, we have the light of Hashem, we have the clarity of Torah in our lives. We know exactly what is right and exactly what is wrong, and therefore we can judge and criticize others who don't. And therefore, v'chineka, we should have the ability to see favor and that which is positive in other people. Finally, a fourth reason, v'choneka, the root of finding favor actually is linked to the Hebrew word chen. Chen means favor. It's linked to the word chinam, free. The whole concept of favor is that you find favor undeservedly so. If I earn my right, then I'm not finding favor in your eyes. I've earned my rights. Requesting that we should find favor in someone's eyes is saying, even though we don't deserve it, nonetheless you should like me. We refer to that quality of favor as a charisma of sorts or something like that. People just like you, not for any particularly good or worked out reason, but just there's something likable, there's a chen, a charm around the person. And therefore we're asking over here, in the final reading, that we should be granted chen, an undeserved gift from Hashem, because the gift of Torah is always by definition undeserved. What we can achieve once we have a clarity of purpose, then perhaps we can earn sechar. But what can give us the reward from the beginning that allows us to be given the light of Torah? How can we deserve that? And therefore, the gift of the light of Torah is always chinam, is always free. And therefore, vichaneka, the giving of Torah is always through finding favor from Hashem, even though it is unearned. So this is another reading of the pasuk. Finally, because we're running out of time, I'll leave this as a conundrum for you. If you look in the sources that I've written, I'm going to suggest that the sources argue that the concept of Yisar Hashem Panav Eilecha, of being elevated, of Hashem elevating his face, is that of resolving the tension which is at the heart of human existence between the fact that we are physical and spiritual beings. We human beings are complicated creatures. We are both physical and spiritual, and we need to merge the two ultimately seamlessly. The source that I brought in Pasuk 26, and we're not going to have time to look at it completely, says that this is the quality of Yisar Hashem Panav Eilecha. Hashem should lift up his countenance. That means he should favor us, not in the sense of matnas chinam, a gift that's given freely, but give us unfair advantage almost. And if you look at the source there, I would suggest that what it's suggesting is it's about the link between us as human beings combining that which is physical and that which is spiritual, and therefore we ask in that we should have peace. This isn't just referring to an external peace, but referring to an internal peace. We say Osa Shalom b'Mromov, Hashem who makes peace on high, who Yasa Shalom Aleinu, who should make peace upon us also. The Malachim are always in a state of peace. They have a simple life. Malachim are simple creatures. They're angels. They don't combine like we complicated human beings do, a physical dimension, a spiritual dimension. They're not drawn after that which is wrong and that which is right, that which is material and physical and that which is spiritual. They live in a state of shlemus, of perfection, of peace, of shalom, of peace. They're not wrecked and torn apart. We human beings have the potential to tear ourselves apart, driven in different directions. Our emotions pull us in different ways, our mind pulls us in different ways, our bodies pull us in different ways, and our souls pull us in different ways. And therefore, we ask that we should be granted the gift of peace, which is the second half of the pasuk. The protection around this spiritual growth which is being promised to us is also this combination of physical and spiritual. So I hope that gives some insight into Birchas Kohanim, and hopefully we'll give a little bit more meaning to this bracha. And we'll have to leave. I'll dangle in front of you tantalizingly. We'll leave maybe next year, please God. We'll meet for Parshat Nasso again, and we'll discuss why we need the Kohanim. We'll discuss how Birchas Kohanim is done, what this idea of the finger arrangements are about, and why we don't duchen in Eretz Israel. But I'll leave that for another year. We've run out of time for this year. I'll pause there in case there are any questions. Otherwise, we'll move over to our halachic topic for today. Okay, so we'll switch to the halachas. Now, till now we've been doing kashrus. I want to switch to the halachas of Shabbos. Now, I have to confess, I've held off doing the halachas of Shabbos for a while. I started this format of Parsha and Halacha about a year ago, and we stuck to Hilchos Shabbos because I was a little nervous of Hilchos Shabbos. Hilchos Shabbos is massive; it's very overwhelming, and to be able to teach it and share it in an organized and systematic manner is quite a task. And therefore, first of all, I start off with the tefillah that I should succeed in so doing. Number two, I've decided therefore to start off with some of the smaller, simpler malachas. As we know, there are 39 malachas on Shabbos. Some of them are a little simpler, some of them are a little more complicated. There are malachas like bishul, cooking, and hitzah, carrying, and so on, which are infamously complicated. We know the ideas of carrying are very difficult, and an Eruv is a very halachically complicated device, and when one's outside an Eruv, what does one do? So on and so forth. These are very complicated halachas. Bishul, cooking on Shabbos, exceptionally complicated, and therefore I decided, in the interest of clarity, to start off with some of the smaller malachas, which are a little bit easier to handle. So that's introduction number two. Introduction number three is therefore I'm going to try and go in a systematic manner. I promise, to the best of my ability, therefore, that by the time we finish each malacha, I will answer all the questions that people have, and will cover any practical questions that people raise. Please, when I'm doing these halachas, feel free to raise any questions you want about the malacha I'm talking about, but I reserve the right to put the question on hold and come back to it at the end, just because I want to build the structure of this halachic topic in a systematic manner. Okay, so that's an introduction to Hilchos Shabbos. Now, there are 39 malachas on Shabbos. These are 39 prohibited acts, the Sasakal malacha. That's one section of halacha on Shabbos. In addition, there are other things that are forbidden on Shabbos. There's uvta d'chol, weekday type behavior, even when it's not a specific melacha. There's daber dover, the speaking weekday type speech on Shabbos, which is also forbidden, even though it's not a specific melacha. And then there's mukta, there's moving of items, which isn't a specific melacha. So if I write with my pen, I'm doing the melacha of kosev, of writing. If I merely move my pen, I'm not doing any writing, but I'm simply transgressing the issa of mukta. If I on Shabbos spend my time talking about what I want to write with my pen, then I am transgressing the issa of daber dover, of not speaking on Shabbos in a Shabbostic manner, and so on and so forth. So Shabbos has many halachas, negative halachas. In addition, it has a whole array of positive halachas. We already mentioned Zachros Yom HaShabbos, mention Shabbos, which we fulfill through saying Kiddush. There's the idea of Oneg Shabbos, pleasure of Shabbos, Shabboson, the Ramban says, making Shabbos Shabbostic, Shabbaton, making it an atmosphere that's appropriate for Shabbos, and so on and so forth. So there's a whole array of negative and positive halachas. I'm going to focus at the start of this series on the 39 malachas, because I think they are the most the ones about which there's particular confusion, and then hopefully we will eventually get up to some of the positives and mukta, and so on and so forth. Now, the 39 malachas are all derived from the Mishkan. Again, I'm not going to go through the psukim, but the Torah links the Parsha of Mishkan to the section of the Torah that talks about Shabbos. When the Mishkan was built, there were 39 creative activities that humans engaged in building the Mishkan. The Mishkan is a microcosm of the whole world, of the macrocosm of the whole world. They created a miniature spiritual world, which therefore embodied all spheres of human activity, and therefore we learn from the Mishkan the 39 significant creative sorts of activities that humans engage in, which parallel, if you like, the full creation of the world, because of course we rest on Shabbos to remember, amongst other things, that which Hashem rested and ceased creating the world, and therefore in a certain parallel way, if you like, in the same way that Hashem created the world through 39 malachas, we too, as human beings, have 39 ways of engaging with the world, which we learn from the Mishkan, and this is the source of the 39 malachas. There are then numerous subcategories to the 39 malachas, which we refer to as toldos. So the 39 categories of malachas are called the 39 avot, the parent categories, 39 parents, and each parent has subcategories, which we call the toldot, the children of the categories, and from that one gets the full range of prohibitions on Shabbos linked to malachas, and then around them have built up various protections, rabbinic protections, which we will see as we learn these malachas of Shabbos. What is a malacha? Very briefly, a malacha is a creative activity, engagement with a creative activity. Mere hard work that doesn't have a specific creative outcome isn't a malacha. So if I want to spend the whole of Shabbos weightlifting or moving a chair from one room to another room and do furniture removals, this may be problematic on Shabbos. It may be a problem of certain drabanons. It may lack the spirit of Shabbos, uvta d'chol. It may be a weekday activity, but it's not a malacha. It's not lo saseh kol malacha, because it isn't a creative activity changing significantly the world. Press a light switch, very little physical world, but I'm kindling a fire, and that's already a malacha, even though it's, very little physical activity. It's not hard work, but nonetheless, I'm changing the world, creating something. It's a creative activity, and therefore, it is a malacha on Shabbos. So Shabbos means a creative activity, but it also means engaging with a creative activity. And I'll just give one example of what I mean by that. We're very familiar with the idea of a concept of a shinoi. If I do a malacha in an unusual manner, that reduces it from being a Torah prohibition to being a rabbinic prohibition. Rabbinic prohibitions, drabanons, we still can't do. But if it's an emergency situation where I have to do something, or various other scenarios where there's some pressing need which is sufficient to push away the drabanon, I can do it with a shinoi. Now, what's the concept of a shinoi? Because I do it in an unusual manner. Now, why would this make a difference? Imagine someone is up in front of Beis Din for murder, and the supposed criminal stands in front of the dine and says, "Your Honor, I submit that I'm not guilty of the Torah prohibition of murder, because I was very careful when I pulled the trigger. I used my little finger on my left hand, and I did it with a shinoi, and therefore I should be exempt from my Torah culpability of murder." I mean, that's nonsense. There's no such argument when it comes to Ritzicha, because Ritzicha is the act of causing the unwarranted death of another human being, and therefore it's murder, however one did it, whether one did it with the shinoi or not. With Shabbos, it's different. The reason one's exempt when one does a shinoi is because a malacha means engagement with an activity, full throwing oneself into it. And this really is an introduction to a whole realm of halachas with respect to Shabbos, in which I'm exempt if there are unintended side consequences, in which I don't throw myself into the activity, and I don't immerse myself in the activity. Now, the halachas of how exactly we define this are complicated, but we rely on these halachas every single day of our lives, every single Shabbos of our lives. We walk through the streets and we're triggering CCTV. Perhaps we're walking through snow or mud, and on the soles of our shoes we have embossed letters which stamp a shape into the snow, into the mud. We don't worry about these. Why not? Because I'm not doing a malacha. I'm walking along, I'm walking through the street. I'm not engaged in a malacha. So malacha involves engagement, and I just try to here give a couple of examples, unintended side consequences, and shinoi and other such things. But these are really, each one needs to be discussed in its own right. But I just want to bring out the point that a malacha means a creative activity, number one, and engagement with the creative activity, more importantly, number two. Final piece of introduction. The 39 malachas are divided into 4 subgroups. The first set of 39 malachas are called Sidura de Pat. They're the malachas that are engaged in producing bread or food. So these are 11 activities that I do to produce food, starting from ploughing the ground, through to sowing the seeds, through to harvesting the wheat that grows, and grinding the seeds and making them into flour, and kneading the flour, and baking the bread, and so on and so forth. These are the first 11 of the malachas. And this also brings out the concept of an Av and a Tolda. So let's just unpick one of these halachas. One of the halachas is baking bread, as we just said, Sidura de Pat, the bread making process, baking bread. That's the Av malacha. What happens if I boil the bread, or, sorry, not boil the bread, I boil a potato? That's not baking, it's boiling. What happens if I fry it? That's frying, that's not boiling. What happens if I roast it? So what's with roasting and frying and boiling as opposed to baking? So in some shape or other, these are subcategories. They may be told us, or maybe they are included in the Av because they're similar enough to the Av. I'm just trying to show that an Av malacha is a general category that often includes more within it than at first glance. Even though technically the Av malacha is baking, nonetheless, it includes various subcategories in it too. So this is the concept of one set within the 39 malachas, the making of bread. There's another 3 sets in the 39 malachas. One set is to do with the production of cloth, which is shearing sheep and cleaning the wool and dyeing it and spinning it into threads, combing it and cleaning it and spinning it into threads and weaving it. This is another set of malachas which are to do with making cloth. Then there is another set of malachas which are to do with shelter, building, brick making, laying bricks and building them into bricks and building a house and boina and soisa, and that set of malachas. And the final set of malachas are to do with writing, preparing parchment for writing, skinning an animal, tanning the leather, and producing the parchment which is used for writing. Now, these are the 4 sets of categories of malacha, and I find it very interesting that to this day, these are still the 4 most basic human needs. If we divide all human needs, what are they? They are eating, food production, which is Sidura de Pat, the first 11 malachas as we mentioned. They are shelter, we all need shelter, the second lot of malachas that we mentioned. They are clothing, we all need clothing. And finally, communication. We all need to be able to communicate with each other, which is kosev. And it's a fascinating thing. To this day, if you look at the industries around which the world is built, they're all to do with these 4 elements of human activity. And particularly in the last 20, 30 years, we've become aware of to what degree communication has value. And the whole industry of social media and the internet and emails and everything else is built up from realizing that information, sharing of information is valuable. And that's kosev, that's the set of malachas which are linked to writing. Those are the set of malachas which are kosev. Someone posted on the chat, and I was going to share this, the idea that the 4 groups reflect the way our tzitzis are wrapped around, the threads of the tzitzis are wrapped around. So as Rabbi Kimchi once mentioned, and Boris Shekavanti, because I was also going to share this, that the tzitzis are wrapped around the thread around the way Ashkenazim do their tzitzis, we wrap round in the count of the way these malachas are divided: 13, 11, 8, and 7. I once heard this idea from Dayan Kukovitsky, who my father actually many years ago took me to hear him speak when I was a child, and Dayan Kukovitsky has a beautiful exposition of the weaving process. He produced being a middle-class Jewish boy growing up in the suburb of Golders Green. I didn't know too much about weaving, and Dayan Kukovitsky produced a loom to show people how these malachas work. And I once heard him share this idea many years ago, so I mentioned this in his Luchos. The malachas of Shabbos are divided, as I said, into 4 groups: 13, 11, 8, and 7, which are the number that of times we wrap the tzitzis round. If you look at your tzitzis, there's a thread, the shamash, which is wrapped around the tzitzis, and these are divided into that number of counts according to Minhag Ashkenaz. Okay, so this is an introduction to the concept of malachas, and I now want us to focus in the few minutes remaining on the first of the malachas that I wanted to look at. And I chose a malacha which I think is on the one hand a fairly simple malacha to start with. It's not overwhelming in its complexity, and on the other hand has a number of practical ramifications. And this is the malacha of Tsoveah, dying. Dying not as in cessation of life, but dying as in colouring material or cloths or substances or fabrics, which is part of the cloth producing set of malachas on Shabbat. Now, you may say to me, Rabbi Zobin, I don't do any dyeing. I don't dye cloths. You just told me that you didn't know much about weaving. Well, I don't know much about dyeing. Why on earth is this a malacha that we need to learn about on Shabbos? And the answer is this halacha is applicable to all of us. Well, first of all, in practical day-to-day life, we can't, if we enjoy painting and artwork, we can't do that on Shabbos. Why not? Well, there's 2 malachas that spring to mind: kosev, which is writing, and Tsoveah, which is dying, and we need to look at the difference between the 2. And then there are all sorts of ways in which we could create colour or substance on Shabbos, and we need to look at each one of them and understand the halachas. So, for example, we like painting our bodies, particularly ladies do so, makeup, nail varnish. These are examples, lipstick, these are examples of colouring that takes place on Shabbos. And then there's a variety of other ways in which we colour objects on Shabbos. Perhaps we go out in the street wearing photochromatic lenses. Perhaps we use coloured strips as thermometers on Shabbos. There's quite a lot of discussion at the moment about thermometer testing. We perhaps use various medical tests on Shabbos which involve colouring cloths, where perhaps one dips a dipstick into a urine sample to check for something or other, for diabetes or for pregnancy or whatever it may be. Maybe every time we flush the toilet, there's a colouring agent that runs through the toilet. So there's a vast array of halachas which potentially colouring effects on Shabbos. And indeed, one can question, what's the extent of the malacha? How far does it go? If I put some colouring into food, is that a problem? If I make a cup of tea and I colour my clear liquid with the tea bag, is that a problem? So Tsoveah is definitely a set of halachas that deserve learning, even though I imagine very few of us would actually dye wool in the classic sense in which it was done in the Mishkan. Okay, so this is the malacha of dyeing, of Tsoveah, and that's what I'd like to focus on for the remainder of the time this week and for our next session, Emiyat Hashem. Now, where did Tsoveah take place? It took place in the Mishkan. What did they dye in the Mishkan? Well, the Pesukim tell us. It talks about the yurios HaMishkan, the cloths of the Mishkan, in which they used tcheles, the dye that comes from some form of sea creature or other. Perhaps we have rediscovered it, perhaps we haven't. Argomon, which is a purple type of dye. Tulas shoni, a red-coloured dye. And each of these dyes had their own production method, how they were made. It seems from Rashi that both tcheles and argomon were made from some form of living creature. In fact, we know of a purple colour which was used all the way through into the Roman world. It was a royal colour which were made from living creatures. And then there's Tulas shoni, which seems to have been a herb. Rashi al-Torah says it was a herb of sorts, which they used to use to make a dye. And they used to use that to dye wool. Which fabrics does dyeing apply to? The answer is la halacha, pretty much anything. It applies to fabrics where they absorb the dye, like wools and leathers, because they are permeable. It applies to fabrics where they don't absorb the dye, like metal, for example. If you paint metal, the metal obviously doesn't absorb the dye. It merely sticks to it, and that's also sufficient for the malacha of Tsoveah. If I merely put something on top of something else, that's not dyeing. However, if it attaches it to it, then that's dyeing because I'm changing the color of the object. What do I mean by changing the color of the object? I can either mean I'm changing the color of the object on the surface because I'm painting on the surface, in which case, so I'm just getting disturbed by, I'm just going to mute everyone again. In which case, I'm changing the color of the object and by sticking something to the surface, or I'm changing the color of the object by it being absorbed into the object, and that's also sufficient for the malacha. Incidentally, the malacha also applies to any improvement of color. So, for example, if I deepen a color, that is also the malacha. And this is evidenced by Gemara, which talks about changing the color of lips. Lips are anyway red, but one makes them redder. That would potentially be Tsoveah, though we'll get onto the subject of makeup later. Similarly, giving something a shine or a gloss could potentially be the malacha of Tsoveah because I'm changing the appearance, even though it's a transparent gloss, and therefore I'm not changing the color. So Tsoveah is where I'm changing the appearance, whether it's a direct change of color or merely an enhancement or a deepening or a shining of the color. That would also be sufficient. Now, I already mentioned that there is a very similar malacha, which is kosev, writing. The commonality between the two is that in both cases I'm adding ink to a fabric, in which case, in one case I am coloring the whole fabric, in the other case I'm merely writing letters on the fabric. So which one is which, and how do I determine which is which? And surely, I mean, it is true that maybe not every case of writing is dyeing, but surely every case of dyeing is it's true that not every case of dyeing is writing, it doesn't produce letters, but every case of writing, I am attaching ink to the object, and surely therefore that every kosev, every time I write, I should also be liable for Tsoveah, for painting. And the answer to this question is that these two malachas are very different. Kosev, the significance of the malacha, writing, the significance of the malacha is the symbol itself. In kosev, I'm not enhancing the fabric or the paper, though it may do so, but my intention is the symbol itself. And incidentally, you can produce symbols without any paper at all. You can carve out a letter, for example, and that would also be kosev. You can etch a letter, like with the luchas, and that would also be kosev. So kosev isn't, the point of kosev isn't that I have a substance and I'm attaching a new color to it. It's I'm creating a symbol where the symbol has its own value and significance in terms of what it communicates. Now, I'm not going to go through the halachas of kosev in detail now, but it's always, the idea is that it's representational. So if I do a letter or a number, it represents something. Even if I draw a picture, the picture isn't the real thing, it's a representation of a real thing. So kosev is about communication, and I already mentioned that the malachas are divided into different sets. Kosev belongs to a very different set. It's not about coloring cloths or material, it's about communication and information, the fourth of the human needs. And therefore kosev is a malacha where the character, the letter, retains its own significance, its own importance, as opposed to becoming submerged and insignificant in the decoration it achieves of the object itself. So there could be borderline cases, and we'll discuss those in a few moments, but in general, the question I need to ask myself is it the symbol, the content, the lettering, the picture that matters to me? In which case it's kosev, or is it the enhancement to the fabric which matters to me, where the symbol or the coloring is merely a means to enhance the fabric, in which case the malacha is Tsoveah, dyeing, as opposed to kosev, because I want to negate it, I want it to be bottled, I want it to be merged into the fabric itself. So this is an interesting thing. So for example, if I draw a picture, that's kosev, I'm trying to make the picture. If the picture already exists, for example, I've drawn the outline, and now I wish to color in the outline, that would be Tsoveah. Because I'm not adding to the communication, even though I'm enhancing the picture, I'm coloring something. What am I coloring? I'm coloring the fabric or coloring the picture. And therefore, in that case, this is an enhancement through color, as opposed to a type of creation of symbol or communication. And therefore, the malacha would be Tsoveah, not kosev. So if I do it in two stages, and I first draw the outline of a picture, and then I fill it in, then I will have done two malachas, a double whammy. I'll have done Kosev by creating the symbol, and Tsoveah by drawing in the coloring. If I just create a symbol just by drawing letters, then I've only done Kosev. If I just color a cloth, then I've only done Tsoveah. There are borderline cases which are a little less clear. And here I'm referring perhaps to some modern art, where you have a sort of a pattern of coloring, and the symbolism is very abstract. You have to be aware here you're talking to someone who is particularly uncultured in this area. And the last time I went to a modern art museum, I was admiring with great pleasure a particular work of art, so someone pointed out to me that it was the fire exit sign. So I'm not an authority on this matter, but the point I'm making is there is art where it isn't clear actually what the significance of the art is. Is the point of the art that it's beautifying the cloth, in which case it would be Tsoveah, or is the point of the art the symbol itself? And it would be difficult sometimes to determine that. Am I colouring in a cloth and Tsoveah, or am I trying to communicate a message, in which case it would be Kosev, or nothing actually. Maybe it would only be an Issa D'Rabbanan, because it doesn't fulfill the criteria of Kosev, since it's not a specific symbol or object. And nonetheless, it's also not Tsoveah, since it has its own importance rather than a way of decorating the cloth. So if you're skeptical about modern art and you don't think it's communicating anything, it may end up that it's neither Kosev or Tsoveah. But again, this is a little bit of a borderline area in halacha. But in the classic cases, the difference between writing and dyeing, the malacha of Kosev, lichtov, to write, and the malacha of Tsoveah, to dye, are two very different malachas. One is about the material, the object that's being dyed, and the other is about the object that is the symbol that's being created, the representational symbol, letter, picture, character, number, whatever it is that's being created. This is the difference between the malachas. I'll conclude by mentioning that Tsoveah also applies when I'm colouring liquids. So not only is it solids, where it's absorbed into the fabric of the wool or whatever it is, not only is it solids like metal where it coats the surface, but even a liquid where I colour the liquid, the concept of Tsoveah, dyeing, would also apply. And this basically is the broad parameters of the malacha as far as Torah law is concerned. Next week we will look at when Tsoveah does and doesn't apply in terms of permanence of carrying, and if I cause it, if it can be easily wiped away, and if it's only temporary, and other such practical halachas. But for today, we've run out of time, so I'll conclude here. And I wish everyone a good day, and I hope that you found that both interesting in terms of Birchas Kodim, in terms of the halachas of Shabbos.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi.